Okay, and welcome to the stream. So this is an interesting conversation for anyone that's been following the Israel advocacy movement for a while, because I'm joined by Bob of Speaker's Corner. Bob, welcome
Hello,
to the
how you
channel.
doing?
I'm
I think
doing.
I'm good. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to answer. I'm doing very well, but you're going to say something.
I was just going to say, I think it's been a while since we've swashbuckled over any topics, and I think is it my first time on your channel? You've
I
been on
think
mine,
no, it's the second. We had
is
you
it?
on after the stabbing at Speaker's Corner
Ah,
a while ago when someone attempted to take Hatun Tasha's life.
yeah. It's
So
a
yeah,
shame that every time that we get together for talk, there's always some tragedy going on.
yeah. Hopefully, the next time it will be over some joyous news.
Hopefully, yes. God willing.
Knowing our line of work, that's not going to be the case. And
Yeah.
so what are we doing today? Well, I follow Bob on Twitter or X, and I noticed an awful lot of tweets saying Gaza should be Christian, and that perked my attention. Okay, that is not an argument that I've heard. I've heard Gaza should be free of Hamas. I've heard Gaza should be Jewish. I've heard Israeli. I've heard Gaza should be under Hamas still. But I've not heard Gaza should be Christian. So, Bob, I'll hand the floor over to you.
Yeah. So basically, following the atrocious, tragic, and absolutely horrific events of the Hamas attack on Israel, I think it is beyond any reasonable doubt that the Gazans, at least for the foreseeable future, have lost the right to rule themselves, in my humble opinion. And Israel has won the right to control Gaza because Gaza just can't be a good neighbor, isn't a good neighbor. Hamas had the opportunity to build a Singapore in the Mediterranean, and instead, what they built was a terrorist cell and radicalized the entire population. The foreseeable, but obviously, it is unconscionable the idea that the Gazans should be driven out of Gaza. The Palestinians live there; that is their home, and so the question is, how then can we fix an issue like Gaza? And what I would advocate is that under an Israeli security blanket, in which Israel takes full control of this region for the foreseeable future, Israel works with Messianic Jews inside of Israel, the Christian churches inside of Israel, and Christian missionary organizations from all the countries that Israel considers an ally, and supports a Christian missionary effort inside of Gaza for the Christianization of the Gazan people. The reason being that a Christian Gaza is not going to be a threat to Israel. A Christian Gaza will build a Singapore in the Mediterranean. A Christian Gaza will relate to Israel as a friend, and Israel will not need to fear another Hamas-style atrocity that it has occurred. And this means that the Gazans can keep their land, and it means that Israel does not have a terrorist state on its borders, and a free of Hamas and free Christian Gaza would mean that then Israel doesn't have to be worrying about this border. It could have a neighbor that it could trade with. It could have a neighbor that it could have relations with, because it's not going to be in the nature of such a Christian society to treat Israel as its enemy. There would be that impulse for reconciliation, and so, with the full backing of the Israeli state and the Israeli security services, helping converts to be protected, making sure that militant tendencies amongst the Islamic community is suppressed and dealt with, and amongst the full backing of the Israeli state and security apparatus, the aim should be to make Gaza Christian, which is incidentally the historical faith of the Palestinian people. So they would be returning to their heritage. And I believe that squares the circle of the Gaza problem, that in a way that is acceptable to Israel, which unilaterally pulled out of Gaza, and also the need for the Gazan people to hold on to their land, but freeing themselves from the ideology that's poisoning them, ruining their livelihoods, and causing a threat to the Israeli state.
So, if you were to say Lebanon,
we can get
it
on
sounds
Lebanon.
sensible in the sense that Lebanon was a majority Christian nation until very, very recent history. There's a huge Christian population in Lebanon today. In Gaza, there's 1,000 Christians. 1,000. It's 0.05% of the population.
Yep. I mean, the point of missionaries is you change that.
Yeah, I understand what missionaries do, but
changing 1,000 to 100,000 is every missionary's goal.
There's so many points I could pick at your plan.
Go for it. Go for it.
The first one is UK is a Christian nation.
No, it isn't.
Well, it was, and the majority of the population still take Christian.
No, they're not.
They still take Christian, or is it a minority under 50%?
It's a minority, according to the last national census.
What percentage take?
41%.
41%. Okay, and so that only further emphasizes my point. If Christian missionaries in the UK can't persuade 60% of those of devoid of faith to return to their ancestral faith, what hope do you have against, with the greatest respect, a bulldozer of an ideology of radical Islam, Ikhwan Muslimin? You have 1 million people, so half of the population's under 18, that have been indoctrinated into the jihad. These are not, they're not being taught in a Church of England style relaxed environment. They are being taught in a almost fascistic ideological extreme religion, extreme faith. So
So a couple of things. Firstly, just when you study history, when a state apparatus backs a conversion campaign, that conversion campaign is always more successful.
Why would we convert them? So again, just so interject. Why would we throw the weight of our
state apparatus?
Why would we risk our children's lives to convert people to a faith that we don't belong to, when we could just as easily convert them to secular atheism? Why on earth would we be doing it? I'm failing to see why. Maybe we open up Jewish missionaries and we convert them to Judaism.
Well, Judaism, to my knowledge, doesn't seek to convert people to Judaism.
We do seek something called, we don't convert, but we do encourage people to follow the 7 laws of Noah.
Right. So if they're going to, so in the end, we both agree that sadly, Islamists have had such a complete grip over the Palestinian people for so long that an entire society has now been radicalized.
Yes.
And the only way you're going to deal with that is through a de-radicalization program. The problem is, the problem is atheists make terrible missionaries. That's the first thing. There's no such thing as an atheist missionary movement. And
I think they make the best missionaries in the world, which is why they've taken a sledgehammer to Western Christianity. You guys
atheism,
are in decline.
You're confusing liberalism with atheism. Those are two different things.
Okay.
We could get into, if you want to talk about the history of Europe and the de-Christianization of Europe, we can definitely do that. I'm happy to have that conversation right now. You are going to lose. That's connected to liberalism. But what I'm saying, but the idea of secular atheism, it is a non-starter. The only attempt that we've ever had of a secular atheist missionary movement is the New Atheist Movement. It didn't even have the lungs to go 20 years, and it is already failed. Whereas the Christian missionary movement has demonstrably succeeded in countless places when it has been backed by the state. And Israel essentially, and well, I'm speaking about what I think is in Israel's best interest. Consider me a critical friend of Israel, like not someone who's uncritical. I don't think that Israel is faultless. I definitely think Israel has made mistakes and has done things that were wrong. But at the end of the day, I'm not one of these people that's anti-Jewish or, wants to see the destruction of Israel. I just want to see a healthy Israel. But a healthy Israel is also an Israel that owns its screw-ups and its cock-ups. And as I don't even know if we agree. Do we agree that Gaza needs to come under Israel's control for the short-term future, for at least maybe in the next 20 years or so?
I wouldn't put a period on it, whether it's 5 years, 20 years, forever. That I think we have to wait and see. I think we agree there needs to be, at the very least, a de-radicalization process that goes on. I think those that want to leave Gaza should 100% be able to leave. The place looks like many parts of it look like a complete hellscape. Access to basic utilities like electricity and water in some areas is very difficult. So if someone wants to leave that, Egypt should open the border. Israel should provide boats. Something should happen so that those that want to leave can leave.
Go on, I'll let you finish. Sorry.
And those that wish to remain, then there's a whole conversation. I think there's complete agreement that there needs to be de-radicalization.
Right. And to that end, I would like to see a future in which Gazans are empowered and able to remain in Gaza as Palestinians. But they obviously cannot go on with this ridiculous Islamist ideology. So we've got to replace it with something. You've proposed atheistic secularism. I'm saying atheists make terrible missionaries. But I guarantee if the Israeli state, bearing in mind that I'm saying work with churches in Israel, so the Israeli Christian community work with your own citizens to evangelize the Gazans into the Christian faith and to make Gaza a Christian enclave. Not just a place where Gazans are becoming Christians, but also where you allow Christians who are fleeing persecution from around the Middle East to come and settle. And that will dilute the sort of ethnic Palestinian identity of Gaza. It will make Christianity the central focus of its identity. And then what you will have is a neighbor that you can trust and work with, but also one in which Gazans are able to remain in Gaza and are not driven from their home.
And so a few things to pick you up on there. So when it comes to de-radicalization, what you're proposing, I don't think has ever been tried by anyone anywhere.
It has.
I think really a non-Christian nation has helped Christian missionaries to spread Christianity to basically 100% Muslim population, non-Christian population.
Well, yes, the French Republic did it. The French colonial empire did it. That was a non-Christian, liberal, secular nation that allowed Catholic missionaries to work throughout its empire.
And what was they were great at creating pagans, turning pagans into Christians in places where they hadn't been exposed to religion, more so the Abrahamic faiths. And but it's incomparable to a highly educated, a highly religious, fanatical in many instances, population. Like Islamism is the mainstream, which is why when on October the 7th they took the corpses of our kidnapped or murdered and our kidnapped people back into Gaza, thousands of ordinary people swarmed the streets to spit, beat, and curse those bodies.
Really shameful behaviour.
Yeah, it was clearly a radicalized society. And
so how are you going to de-radicalize it?
if Gaza is to remain largely populated by Gazans, which is probably going to be the outcome, I'd imagine, but who knows?
Is it the one you want, Joseph?
Truthfully, it's beyond my pay grade. I don't know what I want is a neighbor. So I have conversations with Palestinians all the time, in person and online, in Yehuda V'Shomron and on Omi TV. And some of them are incredibly fruitful, and I will trust these people with my lives. I would go into their neighborhoods where if people discovered I was a prominent Zionist, I would undoubtedly be murdered, but I trust these people with my lives. And I know I can coexist with these people. But then you look at the scenes that we saw on October the 7th, and I can't begin to comprehend how I can coexist with those people. And so for me, if there is a de-radicalization process, it would have to come for me from Muslims rather than Christians, because I think the success rate would be abysmal. I think if we went in, let's say even if you were successful and you turned them into Christians, what's to stop them from just turning into crusaders and slaughtering us like you did in Worms and Mainz and all of these French and German places on the way the last time you came into the Levant to take it from the Muslims?
To be fair, we were liberating Christian land during the Crusades. We weren't invading someone else's land. We were liberating Christian land.
Which both of you were squatting because God gave it to Al-Yahud.
Well, I don't agree. I agree that God gave. I agree with you that God gave the land of Israel to the Jewish nation, but I don't agree with you that God expects the Jewish nation to remain outside of the new covenant. And the Jewish nation should be in the new covenant.
But the new covenant, we cease to exist as the Jewish people.
No, you are the Jewish people. That can't be taken away from you. That's an ethnic identity.
So can a Jewish Christian marry a non-Jewish Christian?
Can a Messianic Jew marry a non-Messianic Jew? Is that what you're asking me?
I'd ask if a Christian Jew can marry we haven't called them Messianic.
Yeah. But so a Messianic, as far as I'm concerned, and I would argue this point to anyone who disagrees, and believe me, there are Christians that disagree, a Messianic Jew can marry a non-Messianic Jew.
Yeah, and so the minute that happens, the Jewish people cease to exist.
No, is being Jewish an ethnicity?
No, it's a people. Ethnicity is a modern concept. Like we are a people. If you have a Jewish mother, or if you convert to the faith, then you're Jewish.
Then what we are talking about is that there is a bloodline connected to being Jewish, and so you are Jewish regardless of the faith of your mother, as evidenced by the fact that the Israel state accepts atheists as Jews.
No, so I'm not explaining that clearly. If you have a Jewish mother, you're Jewish. Let's say you have children, and those children are two boys, and they marry two non-Jewish girls, then your bloodline ceases to be Jewish.
Well,
over time, eventually, you will cease to be Jewish. It's our adherence to the law of Moses that has retained us as a people.
Where is that law in the Torah that your mother has to be Jewish for you to be Jewish?
So we have the old law and the written law. You reject the old law, obviously.
Yeah, of course, exactly. Yeah, so I just don't accept the rabbinic interpretation of what it is to be Jewish.
And that's fine. You're free to think whatever you want about the Jewish people, but we have our own definitions, which we'll adhere to.
I get it, but my point to you is that coming back to the Gaza thing, because I think we're kind of falling into a bit of a segue.
Let me conclude my point, because I was trying to make a point with that. I think the most effective people to de-radicalize Ikhwan Muslimin, Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas adherents, are other Muslims of a more moderate persuasion. And I kind of see the Muslim world in the Middle East being divided into two camps.
Yeah.
There's the the jihadis, the radicals. So that's your Ikhwan Muslimin. That's all of the different, whether it's Jabal al-Nusra, whether it's all of these different militant groups.
Yeah.
And then you have monarchists is a bad term, conservatives is a bad term, but the states that were basically formed on the back of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the Woodrow Wilson's movement.
You're talking about Arab nationalism.
Arab nationalism, they decided to give the self-determination to the indigenous peoples of different lands. And so that created all these different Arab fiefdoms, whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it's Jordan, Syria, Iraq. They all had the Arab kings, the emirs.
Yeah.
And I'd say these countries, the Gulf states, etc., so anyone with a king, with a strong leader, they're more conservative, and they're in conflict with the jihadis, because the biggest threat to their power isn't the West, it's radical Islam. And so I believe they are the best people to de-radicalize Gazan society, because they share a faith, they're very devout, they're very conservative, but they're not radical. They want stable nations. Stability is good for them, and stability is good for us. And I'd imagine you'd have far more success getting an Emirati scholar to convince a student of Hamas to embrace moderation over extremism than you would to convert them to an entirely different faith, which they've been raised to believe is paganism. So I just imagine it would be a much greater success rate. So that would be what I would argue in terms of de-radicalization, get the Emiratis, the Saudis, etc., to bankroll and
the Saudis. The Saudis. Are you kidding me? Salman is a blip. You know, Prince Salman of Saudi Arabia is a blip, and actually the entire and I agree, there is an emergent modernist movement within the Arab occupied world. And I say Arab occupied world because you've kind of done a disservice to the native peoples of the Middle East. Persians are not Arabs, Assyrians are not Arabs, Phoenicians are not Arabs, Copts are not Arabs, Berbers are not Arabs, and these are all people that have been Arabized by Islam. And their story should not be ignored. You know, the Middle East is not an Arab world. It is an Arab occupied world. It is an Arabized world. But then also and I agree, there is definitely this moderate form of Islam that seems to be getting quite fashionable in the Middle East. I've noticed it myself. But it's a blip, Joseph. Don't just look at Islamic history. For 1,400 years, there has not been a single year, not one in 1,400, in which there hasn't been some Islamic army marching somewhere against some Christian population waging jihad. The moderate movement, the modernist movement, let's call it, and I do wish them, I wish them well. I want them to succeed. But the reality is that anyone who understands Islamic texts or Islamic history or Islamic fiqh just knows that this is a blip. And the thing is, it will not last. It will eventually dissipate. And I think this is and the thing about religions is that they have staying power. You know, Judaism demonstrates that, Christianity demonstrates that, Islam demonstrates that. They have staying power over more secular ideologies, and you're appealing to a modernist, secularized version of Islam that is a blip and it will disappear. So it's rather better to play the long game, to put your chips on a much more longer lasting future, and one that I think is fairer, because Palestinians are Palestinians because of Islamist coercion from the past. They would be reclaiming their Christian heritage. Israel needs a neighbor that it can work with. A Christian neighbor is a neighbor that Israel could work with. You already allied with the Christians in Lebanon, in the past. And the Gazans, the Palestinians, have a right to their home, and Gaza is their homeland. And so it is creating a situation and a circumstance in which they can remain.
So multiple things to pick up there. I could apply the exact same argument against Christianity, that it's just a blip. So first and foremost, when I say moderate, I'm not talking waving rainbow flags and saying that God is a woman and blah, blah. I'm saying moderate in a Middle Eastern context, in that they're not into expansionist jihad. They support the rights of al-Kitab within their land. And
do they? Name me a country where Christians are not persecuted.
Emirates.
Wrong. You're wrong. The Christian in the Emirates, you cannot even be a citizen of the Emirates if you convert to Christianity. You can't be a citizen.
You have to. I agree with that. But what they've started building there, they've built churches, synagogues.
Wait. Inside compounds that are at a site that can't display crosses, where there are no Christian processions allowed.
So
name me which emirate doesn't persecute Christians, and let's see what's happening to Christians there.
So this is news to me, so I'm not going to push back hard because I wasn't aware of it. I know you can't preach Christianity, you can't evangelize.
That's discrimination against Christianity.
I personally don't have an issue with that. As a people who don't evangelize our own faith, I'm fine with people saying you can't evangelize.
Which wins my point.
I thought they had a cross on churches in the Emirates. I could be wrong on that. I thought they were outward symbols. I could be wrong on that. Processions, I don't know. I do know countries in the Middle East where you can have processions. I live in.
Well, this is the point. This is the point, and this is what I'm saying is, Israel. One of the reasons why I do support Israel, despite the fact that I don't think Israel is a perfect Middle Eastern country, is that the Christians in Israel are treated better by the Israeli government than any Christian population in any of the surrounding countries, with possibly the exception of Lebanon. And obviously Armenia and Georgia. But the truth is that in any other country in the Middle East, Christians are persecuted and discriminated against minority, and that includes in all of the so-called. You said Saudi Arabia, for crying out loud. Saudi Arabia has nearly 1 million Christians. And I think there's maybe one legal church building, or maybe two at a push, and they've got 1 million people who are Christian in Saudi Arabia. So let's not talk about Saudi being moderate or the Emirates being moderate.
But there is clearly a trajectory that these nations are on, where they are becoming more. Like if you look at Riyadh compared to Mecca, they're very different cities. In Saudi, you have nightclubs, you have all kinds of stuff that goes on in Riyadh. You have women with their hair out, and so there's definitely they're on a trajectory of modernization and moderation. Where it will ultimately end, who knows? But to bring it back to what I was going to say is Christianity. You could say that the bubble we're in at the moment is a blip, in the sense that the last time you guys were in the Levant, you were brutal to the Jews. You burned our. I was going to say our heavenly books. You didn't just burn our books; you burned our people. You ransomed us. It was horrific what the Crusaders and the Hospitallers did as they came through the end of this area, and that was our experience of Christianity for centuries. And now, don't get me wrong. Like in the First Crusade, which was the worst of the Crusades for persecution against the Jews, to my knowledge, there were also bishops that helped Jews. So I'm not saying all Christians back then were monsters, but as a general rule, that Jews have suffered under Christianity, and at that time we suffered more under Christianity than we did under Islam. It's not to say we had it easy under Islam either, but there were apologies, the lesser of two evils for the Jewish experience. Today, there is not a closer friend we have than the Christian people, and I don't think it's a blip. I think this came out of Anglo Protestantism. It came out of Thomas Brightman. It came out of people petitioning Cromwell to allow the Jews back into England. And why did they want the Jews? And Jews, pay attention. The reason why Cromwell was petitioned to allow the Jews to be readmitted into England after they'd been expelled was because they wanted the Jews to settle for England to the Holy Land and take it off the Ottomans to take it off the Turks. So I don't take it similar from the conversation we're having now, but in reverse. And then they thought there would be 1,000 years of Jesus and the whole theology behind it. But that form of Protestant, as I understand it, Christianity was then exported to America and took real root in America, which is why American Christians are among the closest. So if you read how Locke was writing about Judaism, and if you read the Second Treatise, which is a philosophical, political work, it's filled with Hebrew writing in Hebrew script. It's like Isaac Newton used to sign his name in Hebrew. It's incredible the level of interest in Hebrewism and the Jewish people that was back then, and that's continued to this day. So I don't think it's a blip. I think that friendship is genuine, it's sincere, and it's long lasting. And I believe if it can happen to Christianity, then surely it can happen to Islam as well, which is a lot of the work I do.
So a couple of points. Your whole pushback is based on this idea that Christians in the past persecuted Jews. There's no doubt.
My major pushback is I don't think you'll be able to convert 99% of 99.95% of Gazans to embrace Christianity and reject Islam. That's my main pushback.
Not in a single generation. No, it would be a generational process for sure. But all that would need to happen is that Israel changes the sort of deals with the Islamist enforcers, basically, so that the rest of the Palestinian people can just make their own bloody choices. And the thing is, within most Muslim communities, there's always self-appointed enforcers, and if any government just cracks down on those people, then the rest of the people just start doing what they want, because they're not being shepherded anymore. And so you might be surprised at how quickly Christians would succeed in evangelizing the Muslim population if there was backing. Let me finish. Okay. If the security forces dealt with self-appointed enforcers within the Palestinian Muslim community. But one of the points that you did make, fair enough, it's not your main point, but it was an auxiliary point, was that Christians persecuted Jews in the past, which we did. There's no getting around that. And I'm not celebrating it. I condemn it. I think it was tragic. And as you pointed out, many Christians did actually help the Jews, even from protecting them from other Christians. But in talking about my sort of suggestion about Gaza, we're not talking about Gazans ruling over Jews. We're talking about Gazans ruling over Gazans. We're talking about Gazans being an independent country with their own government, their own economy, and living as a separate country in which Jews don't, Israel doesn't rule over them, and they don't rule over any Israelis. So just one final auxiliary point. But especially if this evangelization was encouraged and supported from within the Christian community of Israel, that means that the churches that would grow up in Gaza would have motherly connections to the Christian community in Israel. And that would actually create a sort of binding friendship between the state of Israel and hopefully this independent Palestinian Christian state.
So let's approach this from a different angle to say that I'll have more success showing it from a slightly different perspective. What would you say is the greatest motivator for the violence that's carried out against Israel? What's the ultimate objective of all of these people that repeatedly tried to breach the border, were successful on October the 7th? Yeah, the Islamists, but I'd say the general population of Gaza. Yeah, we can call them Islamists.
I mean, there's huge radicalization of the Gazan people. So the motivator is the Islamic texts that say things like in the Qur'an that Allah will send against the Jews those that will bring hostility towards them until the Day of Judgment. The hadiths that say, and it's in the Hamas Charter, I think it's like Article 2 or Article 1, that on the Day of Judgment, that the trees and the rocks will cry out, "O Muslim, here is a Jew, come and kill him." It is the anti-Semitism that is hardwired into Judaism. Tim Dieppe of Christian Concern recently did a debate whether Islam is anti-Semitic, in which he quoted vast amounts of texts, scholarly opinions. So he quoted from the Qur'an, he quoted from the Hadiths, he quoted from the books of Usul al-Fiqh, he quoted tasfir from ulama, that all are rabidly anti-Jewish. And the thing is, whilst ever the Gazans are committed to Islam, they could always tap back into those narratives at some point.
So then how do you explain the Christians that also fight against Israel? So like from 48 onwards, there have been Christians involved in the Palestinian liberation movement. They're not motivated by Islamic texts. What's their motivation?
They are surrounded by Muslims who are wanting to fight a jihad, and if they are seen to be the allies of Israel or neutral in some way, they will become the victims.
I
So
actually think
it's a matter of survival, but it's also the matter that the Palestinians do feel a grievance for what's happened to them over the course of history. Now, granted, a lot of that is connected to the Arab nations that surrounded Israel, that tried to wipe out Israel and misled the Palestinians, but they still ended up being the geopolitical victims of that whole situation. And so there is genuine grievance, and then that's before we start talking about the abuses of extremists amongst the settlers and so on.
So I think, with the exception of the latter comment, I think you're getting to it. So I think it's important to listen to what people say. So I think when you speak to a Zionist like myself, who gives you the Israeli account of history, we were in 48, we declared, after the proposed partition, we declared independence on whatever we were given, even though it was unsatisfactory. It was a fraction of what we originally promised. And I'm just talking not by God or anything. I'm just talking literally from the League of Nations, San Remo, etc., from the British Balfour Declaration, which San Remo and everything followed. We accepted that. And so from our perspective, 5 armies then invaded. The Arabs who were living in the land launched from the 20s a brutal civil war against us. And we were just farmers and peasants and refugees and survivors of massacres and Holocaust. And we were just getting massacred in our own land. That's a true telling of the history. But if you speak to a Palestinian, they'll give you a very different account. They will tell you, and I think there's truth to what we're both saying, but it's just looking at the same events from different eyes. They will tell you how the Jewish population started growing in the land, ignoring the fact the Arab population started growing at a comparable, slightly slow, but huge rate as well. How the Jews started growing in the land, and they wanted to establish a Jewish state there where they'd been living for centuries, and all of this is true. And then there was a war, and they were displaced. Some of them left voluntarily. There were some expulsions in places like Lod and Ramla. And then they weren't allowed back after they fled. And all of that's true. So they believe a grievance. They believe they should be able to return to Haifa, to Jaffa, to any of the places that they may have originated from, even if it's only one great-great-grandparent. And even if that one great-great-grandparent was only in the land for 4 years, they believe they have a legitimate grievance with Israel. And I think that's why you find Christians fighting alongside, in some instances, fighting alongside Muslims, fighting along Marxists. It's a very, very broad church. Sorry, shouldn't really say that to a Christian. Broad umbrella.
You can say it to an Anglican. but what I would say, Joseph, and I think I tend to agree more with the Jewish telling of that history than the sort of victim narrative of that we get from Islamists. But it still results in the fact that Palestinians, have come off the worst through this historical process. They've been like the Hungarians of the Middle East, and the other thing is, I just want to take this moment to point out the sheer hypocrisy of the political left in the West, who condemn Israel, for doing in the Middle East what we see Muslim migrants doing in the West. Israel is making its land Jewish, and it's got settlers, and it's recreated the Middle East in a Jewish tapestry. And the left in this country will rail against that, coming out with tropes like your European invaders and things like that, and your colonizers and so on, and yet will defend mass migration, uncontrolled migration, and Islamization in the West, as if somehow this isn't exactly the same process in a different direction. And also the fact that they're so loud, the left in this country and in the West generally, about so-called occupation of Palestinian land, but completely silent about Turkish occupation of northern Cyprus, or of Azerbaijan's occupation of Christian Armenian Artsakh, which kind of brings out a point that we'll kind of get back to, which is, I don't think Israel is a country that is always making the right choices. Sending drones to Azerbaijan to participate in a genocide of Armenian Christians does not look good for Israel, and it undermines Israel's position amongst Christian populations in the West that are otherwise quite sympathetic to it, including in America.
Out of curiosity, do Azerbaijan buy weapons of any Western nations or just Israel?
I genuinely don't know, but let's just say yes.
That's my point. It's always the same. Is this Jewish Israeli exceptionism?
No. I would condemn. I would condemn the UK if the UK sold any arms to Azerbaijan. I would, Joseph.
The major differences would be that Israel is dependent upon Azerbaijan's fuel. I think we get, is it 30% of our fuel comes from Azerbaijan, or comes from Azerbaijan? I think that's the case. But that's definitely not the case with the UK or America or any of the major, France or any of the major arms manufacturers.
It doesn't justify it. But I do want to point out the hypocrisy. I just want to point out the hypocrisy, because here in the West, we've got a whole bunch of left going, we shouldn't sell arms to Israel because of what Israel's doing in this war. And yet the fact that many Western governments are okay to sell weapons to Azerbaijan and it doesn't get condemned.
It's not just Azerbaijan. We're saying multi-billion and trillion-dollar arms deals with the Saudis and the Emiratis and all
Israel or the West.
With Yemen, like the wars at Yemen, far larger numbers of civilians are killed in conflicts in Yemen and Syria.
Yeah.
We're in all of these places, well, maybe not Syria, but it's only Israel that is held to a different standard. I just want to pick up one thing that you said earlier, because I don't want to let it say, because it's kind of, I think it's an important thing for this conversation, which is you mentioned that there's Christian persecution from settlers in Israel. I don't think that's the case. I think there are fringe Orthodox Jews, be they settler, be they non-settler, who will abuse Christians, and that's you're going to get that in any society. You're going to get racists. You get people who will leave a pig's head outside a mosque. You will find people who will tear down crosses in a church. Like you get extremist religious fanatics in
absolutely
all cultures. It's not a settler thing; it's a Jewish thing. The overwhelming majority of settlers are just ordinary families, and there's this perception of settlers as being these fanatical, long payout side curls, big machine gun over the, and that's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the settlers. The overwhelming majority of people who live over the Green Line are ordinary families.
Joseph, I am happy to accept that. I am just saying that given the fact that Israel, whether it's fair or not, and I accept that it's not fair, is in a battle for hearts and minds in the West, it would do Israel great favors if it was seen to crack down, even though they are fringe elements, if it was seen to crack down on these fringe elements that are being insulting and vile towards the Christian church. It would help Israel if it was seen not to be participating in a genocide of Armenian Christians in Artsakh, which is exactly what Israel did when it sold drones to Azerbaijan. Now, granted, it's not just Israel that did that, but unfairly, Israel is the one that is on trial in public opinion.
And this is one thing.
Yeah.
So it's one thing I think Israel gets wrong. There's a belief in Israel amongst the average Israeli that it really doesn't matter what the world says. The world has been against us since we became a people, whether it was to go to religious texts for those that are religious, Pharaoh in Egypt, whether it was the Romans, whether it was the Babylonians, the Assyrians, whether it was the Christians, whether it was the Muslims. The world has been against us, and there's nothing we can do to change that. The only thing we can do is help ourselves. Be strong, be powerful, stand up to those that come to cut us down, and extend the hand of peace to those that genuinely want to coexist with us. And so they don't care. Now, I agree. I think it is an arrestable offence, by the way. If a Jew can be arrested for spitting at a Christian, a Jew can be anyone. If you spit on someone in Israel, you're going to get arrested if it's reported. Often with the videos you see online, you're seeing half of what's happening, and so a lot of the interactions are on the Sabbath, where they're not allowed to use electrical devices, and they're going into Jewish neighborhoods on megaphones and basically being incredibly disrespectful. And so some kids will come and spit on them. Other instances, there will just be extremists who aren't reacting to what could be perceived as provocative or insensitive, to just someone spitting at a priest because they are a bigot and they're intolerant. And well, we are not a perfect society. We have plenty of bad apples here, unfortunately, like every nation.
And like I say, all I'm saying is, as unfairly as it is, and I agree that it is unfair, Israel is on trial at the moment, and Israel needs all the allies that it can have. And as someone who does will good things for Israel, my critique, the things that I'm saying are not because hopefully that I'm not one of these people that's rabidly anti-Israel, but it would help Israel if it became the allies of the minorities in the Middle East. One of the ways that that non-Islamist governments have survived in the Middle East is that they played the different minorities. They backed other minorities to weaken the power of the Sunni majority. That's what the Alawites did in Syria up until quite recently. It's what, I'm not saying that these are good governments, by the way. It's what Saddam Hussein did in Iraq. And so as a geopolitical strategy, it is to the benefit of Israel if it made minorities around the Middle East stronger vis-a-vis the Sunni Muslim majority, because that would create a dilution of power to Islamists. That means allying with the Christians of Lebanon again, helping them drive out Hezbollah, maybe working with the Druze and the Christians in Syria so that they can have an autonomous region, which would weaken Jalani's Islamist government, which incredibly the West has been giving millions of pounds to, which I cannot fathom, including the British government, which has given like £70 million to these Islamists, whilst saying that it's not gonna send aid to Israel when Jalani's government is carrying out massacres. I'm just saying that there is a strategy here for Israel.
So I agree with almost everything you said then. I agree with we should be standing and supporting and strengthening the Christians in Lebanon, the Druze in Lebanon and Syria. I actually even would go as far as saying the Kurds, who are a majority Muslim, we should be helping the Kurds to establish Kurdistan in the eyes of the nations. I think Israel was the only nation in 2017 that recognized Kurdistan. So I agree with all of that. I think that's eminently sensible, and that is what we should be doing. And I think the Gaza plan, I think that's more a fairy tale. I just don't. I think even if by some miracle you were able to convert one of the most extreme Muslim populations in the world to majority Christian, I think all you would have then is you'd have to the 11th Crusade or the 12th Crusade, and they launch another crusade.
No, I think maybe there, Joseph, your perception I think maybe there perhaps your ability to hopefully see a different kind of Palestinian is marred by the past. And don't get me wrong, I can appreciate why, given recent history, you might think like that. But a different ideology produces different fruits. And let me just be clear, part of the plan is that what you would say to Christians around the Middle East, to Coptic Christians, to Christians from Iran, to Christians from Saudi Arabia, to Christians in Iraq, come to Gaza and settle. And so what you would do is you would dilute the Palestinian majority, and then working with Israeli Christian communities, including Messianic Jews and the other Arab Christians, helping them to evangelize. With those two things in mind, you could change the demographics of Gaza into a population that is not antagonistic to Israel.
So I
mean,
wait.
I'll land one more point. I'll land it this way. Look at what mass uncontrolled immigration from around the Muslim world has done to the political outlook of the West, how it's become more open to anti-Semitism, how it has become more hostile to Israel. That has occurred because of mass uncontrolled migration. That gaming of the demographics can work another way. You can do what I suspect some people in Israel want, which is to empty Gaza out of its Gazan Palestinian people, or which I think is a much better way, you start bringing in Christian refugees from around the Middle East, and you wipe out the self-appointed controllers who sort of shepherd the Muslim community, so they've got no shepherding. And then you send in missionaries from around the world and from within Israel, and you could re-engineer the demographics and the religiosity of Gaza within a few generations.
So I hear that, and I'll put my counter, and then maybe we bring it to closing comments, because we've nearly done an hour, which is good.
Right.
So have you heard of an organization or a terror group called the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine?
No.
So they were the ones, I don't know if you remember, a few years ago, they went into a synagogue and butchered 4 rabbis, axes through heads, etc. Brutal attack. The founder of that terror group was a man called George Habash. He was Greek Orthodox. And that's not Greek Orthodox Jewish, obviously. That's Christian. There is no shortage of radical extremist Christian Palestinians. The issue, I think, it comes back to there is the perception of there was an injustice, and they chose a side. The Christians who remained in Israel have an incredible life. There have been Christian judges who've sent Jewish prime minister and a Jewish president to jail. Christian Arabs are the highest performing, and not just Arabs, Christians, because there's Armenians, it's not just Arab Christians, although they, I think, make up 80% of the Christians in Israel are Arabs, I think. Christians are the highest performing religious group in education. They outperform religious Jews. So there's an incredible life for Christians that live here. It's the only country in the world where there genuinely is no discrimination and all religions are able to thrive, provided they have Israeli citizenship, and we don't have to get into the complexities of living.
I wouldn't say it's the only one in the world, but I'd say it's the only one in the Middle East.
I said well, I meant Middle East. Sorry.
Yeah, I agree. In the Middle East, yeah.
And so I disagree with their narrative, but I think that Christians who chose to side with the Palestinians, chose to side with the jihad, they lost. There were Christian churches in Gaza before 48, but many of the Christians that went to Gaza, like most of the population in Gaza, fled the war, and they fled to the territory which Egypt held, which was Gaza, and that's where they remained, and they want to return back to Jaffa. They want to return back to the part of Jerusalem I live in used to have a large Christian population. Many of them left in the war, just before or during. And there is a belief that was an injustice, and they want to return. And I think that's the issue. And then that's then mixed with radical Islam, and it creates this toxic extremism that the world hasn't seen. So I think I would put back. Let's just go over the different options there would be. So the first option is voluntary leaving of Gaza, which I think is the mainstream position. The overwhelming majority of Israelis supported. It's what Trump was pushing for, which is if someone's living in Gaza and they want to leave because they're just khalas, I can't live like this. It's about, and I understand that, and it's not a judgment in any way. And I genuinely feel for those that are. I have friends who are peacemakers from Gaza, and they don't want to live there. They want to get out. They want their families out, and I absolutely understand. And I have genuine pity for them for their situation. They were thrust into one of the most brutal conflicts our people in this region have experienced since the founding of the state. And so, if they want to leave, that's
one option. Deplete Gaza of its Gazans to get drain out Gaza of Palestinians.
And I wouldn't even go that far. I mean, okay, one option is clear about if you clear everyone out of Gaza, there's no issue for the Jewish state because they're gone, they can't attack us.
Well, no, there would be an issue if that strategy is obviously would result in cries of genocide and so on. And
there's cries of genocide, but from the Israeli perspective, they're going to accuse us of genocide irrespective.
Anyway, regardless of what you do,
you can argue that transfer used to be seen as a moral solution to ethnic conflict because it stops people from killing each other. So if a population is removed, it's better they're alive and distant than in the land and killing each other.
I don't agree with that option. I think we need to find a way to allow.
I'm also not for forced transfer.
Okay,
but that's one option. That would definitely result in a more secure and stable Israel. You just get rid of the morality of what happens to the people there. Next is voluntary with massive reduced numbers. I think everyone, unless you are so ideologically motivated that you want to force Palestinians to live in a place they don't want to be, I think there are ideological monsters that want that. But most of those of us that have some compassion, and they are, would want for those that want to leave to be able to leave. So then what do you do with the remainder of the population? So the most logical to me seems that they remain Muslim because that's what they are today, but you help to cultivate a more moderate Muslim, whether that's coming from the Emirates, whether that's coming from the Israelis, whether it's coming from... there are Muslims today that fight in the IDF and swearing on the Qur'an, and they're incredibly moderate. I have many friends who are Israeli, Arab, Muslim citizens, diplomats, soldiers, and so it can work. So
Christians are persecuted in the Emirates.
Yes, and that's why I'm just so someone provides a curriculum and funding that de-radicalizes the population but keeps them Muslim. That feels the most likely because it's the smallest movement that you need to make, the population needs to make. The next is you go with the liberalist approach, where you spread democracy, you spread liberalism, and again you take control.
Well, that's already failed.
And it failed in Muslim countries. It didn't fail in other countries. It didn't fail in the UK. The UK is no longer Christian. You just said that at the beginning of the show. So depending on the population as to how successful that is. And then the final option there is not the final option, but the final one that we're discussing is Christianity. And that, for me, is the least in Israel's interest, in that it would come at a huge expense. My children would be fighting jihadis so that your children or you can come and evangelize them and turn them to Christians. If we're going to do it, so the fourth option is we spread Judaism, we spread Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 laws of Noah. We do exactly the same as you're proposing, but instead of spreading Christian, we spread a form of monotheism that is the most sympathetic to the Jewish people. And so Christianity, it feels like the biggest investment, the biggest risk to us, with the lowest reward from just a purely pragmatic, because they're Christian extremists. None of that goes in there. And who knows, maybe I don't know what crusade, I think we're the 11th crusade, but I don't follow all the crusades, I don't know.
That hasn't been one for a long time, so we're talking 1,000 years ago, so we're hardly talking about recent history. If I may go through those options and reply. Well, it's just out of interest, which is your preferred option?
My preferred option, I think, is the most sensible of one, because I'm not for forced transfer.
Is voluntary, allow people to voluntarily leave and then de-radicalize with a more moderate form of Islam.
And I'm undecided on whether it's Israel that controls the curriculum or will allow a third party to come in, like the Emiratis or whomever it may be. And that I don't know, because it's way beyond my...
okay, so allow me to reply. Firstly, obviously, we both agree that forced ejection of the Palestinian people is absolutely unconscionable. So we can immediately take that off the table. Obviously, yes, we would agree that voluntary migration to somewhere is preferable. But let me just ask you this. Why should any country in the world accept a radicalized population that you don't want as a neighbor? I wouldn't want radicalized Palestinians to come to the UK, and any sensible country, as Egypt demonstrates by its own giant wall that has not been condemned by the Pope, demonstrates that nobody wants radicalized Palestinians. So until the process of de-radicalization is completed, I don't think any sensible country should accept Palestinian refugees, because you're essentially importing radical Islamists into your country.
But that means,
wait, let me finish. Wait, I didn't interrupt. I did not interrupt.
I thought it was a question. I thought it was a question. So
yeah, zip it, Joseph. Like, so no sensible country should accept Palestinian refugees, which means that they should stay where they are. Now, obviously, that then presents a problem to Israel, which leaves us with that you have to have a de-radicalization program. And the problem with your suggestion is, yeah, it might work in the short term, and I think that maybe it would. But you keep quoting the Emirates, but the Emirates are a country that literally persecutes Christians, and the ultimate problem is that the anti-Semitism it was before the founding of the Jewish state. It existed before the founding of the Jewish state. It's hardwired into Islamic ideology. It's there in the Qur'an. It's there in hadiths. It's there in the books of Usul al-Fiqh. It's there in the Tafsirs. Just read Ibn Kathir. His favorite phrase is, "May God curse the Jews and the Christians." It comes out in every other sentence, and he's one of their classical commentators long before the founding of Israel. And so ultimately, even if there was some short-term success in trying to create some fake modern version of Islam, at some point in the future, it would snap back. It would snap back because it's there in the DNA. Whereas the reason why Christians have able to eschew anti-Semitism is because it's not there in the New Testament. The New Testament is not an anti-Semitic text, no matter what Rabbi Tovia Singer tells you. And so the reality is that the best long-term solution that gives justice to the Palestinians who have a right to live in Gaza, not return to Jaffa, because I don't think there's hardly any Palestinian alive today who actually has a living right to the homes that they've lost. But but they do have a right to live in Gaza, because that is where they've been born, and we should find a way to empower them to stay there as a responsible nation amongst nations, and Christianity would be the way to achieve that.
Okay, so there was something. What was I interjecting with you? You were saying when I interjected about what was your opening point? Sorry, I'm just.
So I was saying that I think you interjected when I said that no sensible country should accept a radicalized.
The acceptance. So yeah. I just wanted to.
Why should we accept radical Palestinian
because
Islamists?
You created them. You created them. So let me explain how you created them very, very quickly.
No, we did not create them.
UNRWA is responsible for educating and radicalizing millions of Palestinians. So I think it's 70% of children are educated by UNRWA in Gaza. 90-something%, I've forgotten the exact percentage, but 90-something% of UNRWA's funding comes from the West. It doesn't come from the Arab states. They contribute basically nothing. It doesn't come from the Muslim states. They contribute very little. Despite
it's
being
liberals.
Funds. It's United
Liberals.
Kingdom, America, Germany, France, the EU. And you created this problem. Not only that, I mean, Britain in particular, almost every problem that we're experiencing today in Israel can be traced back to terrible decisions that the British made in the 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s, and then the continuation of pushing their model on what they think should happen here, two-state solution, funding UNRWA, funding all these radical. I mean, there's just been a huge report on the release in Israel and all the money that the British government has funneled into Hamas and Gaza. It's like the Britain, through their foreign policy, has created. Hajamin al-Husseini was one of the most senior Nazi officials in Berlin. He was appointed to his position in British Mandatory Palestine by the British. We created the monster. We turned a blind eye as he massacred Jews. General Stores looked away. We allowed him to escape to Germany. We allowed him to recreate. And I say, well, Britain, I was born in Britain. Britain created so many of the problems. Originally, they were given a mandate over all of the territory, Jordan, Israel, Gaza, the West Bank, on the condition they establish a Jewish national home. The first thing they did was give 78% of the territory away to a man from Arabia who had no connection to the land, and he called it Jordan. And Britain has just made bad decision after bad decision. They went against their word. They didn't give us a state. They didn't recognize us. They did recognize Jordan's annexation of the West Bank. And so the radicalization that you're experiencing, or that we're experiencing in Gaza, has been created by Britain, has been created by the West. And also that doesn't take away the agency from the Muslims and the Arabs who live here. Obviously, they are ultimately responsible for their own actions. But there is a strong argument that you are not impartial, neutral entities in this conflict. You are central to it, which suggests to me there is a responsibility there. Now, I get it as an Englishman, why you wouldn't want to see.
I'm a Christian.
The students of UNRWA suddenly sitting in Southall, I think within my land, because there are many radicals. I mean, it's crazy. I'm on this Omi TV app making videos with people online, and I set it to the UK, and I tend to have a lot of conversations with Muslims from the UK because there's a surprising lot of them on this app. And so many of them tell me they're from Syria, and when you scratch, it's like, okay, what were you doing in Syria? I spoke to somebody last night who said he went to Syria. And he encountered Daesh. I was like, you encountered Daesh? In what capacity? When you were Daesh in Syria? And
are these people in the UK?
Yeah, they're all in the UK.
Yeah.
Germany as well. Germany has an insane amount of people when you go on these videos.
Yeah. And
Belgium in the UK, massive.
And this is the problem. Liberalism is a cancer that's killing the West because it just doesn't know how to deal with the Islamist threat. And Israel is actually an example to us of how you deal with Islamists. I mean, you've done such a fantastic job. I was absolutely bowled over with joy the way that you dealt with Hezbollah. That was just such an amazing strategy, and stroke of genius, incredibly targeted to the militant. Granted, sadly, you couldn't prevent innocent victims getting caught up with it, but it certainly beats a smart missile, which is itself designed to reduce civilian casualties. And, I think that the way that Israel has sought to conduct this war is commendable, like in the way that it sought as best as it could, which is incredibly difficult, to reduce civilian casualties. That does not mean that every soldier in the Israeli army has conducted themselves perfectly. There is that incident of the two Palestinian Christians that were shot near the church, the two women, the daughter and the mother. And I don't know what the ballistic report said about that, but it can't be hard to examine a bullet and try and find out which rifle it came from, because I doubt Hezbollah and Israeli soldiers are shooting from the same guns.
They actually are. It's one of the
Are they
shows.
really?
There's a lot of I'm terrible with guns, but the M6s. Some of the better guns. Basically,
You're buying
the
guns
same
from
guns that
the. Well, so basically, what are you saying, that Hamas and Israel are buying guns from the same supplier? Who's that?
There's a lot of Israeli guns used by Hamas because they steal our weapons. On October the 7th, they came in, they took our weapons, and then
right,
they
fair enough.
paraded around in their parades. But that
Fair
said,
enough. Okay, fair enough.
I don't know what happened with those two, Chris. I remember reading it at the time and forming my opinions back then, but truthfully, with so much that's gone on this war, I can't remember how that was finally resolved. But what I would say is, I don't doubt that at some point in this war, there have been Israeli soldiers, who have breached our code of conduct and committed offences. And I hope that anyone who has gone against our code of conduct is dealt with appropriately in the courts. But as a general rule, we've operated on a level that's never seen before, which is why the death toll, the verified death toll, is at around 50,000, as opposed to 1.4 million, which is what it should be, because 70% of the buildings have been damaged or destroyed, and we have not killed 70% of the people, which would be 1.1 million.
Exactly. No, exactly. Anyone who has ever studied any war realizes that Israel is breaking its balls to try and spare civilian casualties. But unfortunately, in such an intense conflict, there is sadly going to be the tragedies that are occurring. But let's be clear, if Hamas didn't hide behind civilian infrastructure, 70% of there'd be more than 70% of buildings of Gaza still standing. So this itself is the reality of Hamas. But coming back to the point, because I was trying to get through your list. So we've got our own problem with Islamists that the liberals have imported, right? We don't need to add fuel to that fire. And you're wrong, Joseph, to say that we've created the Islamist problem. Islamic teaching, the Prophet Muhammad created the Islamist problem. The Islamist problem is 1400 years old. It did not emerge in 1948. It did not emerge in 1970. It did not emerge in 1822. The Barbary pirates were attacking America long before Israel was founded. And as I've said, for 1400 years, there's never been not 1 year in 1400 where there hasn't been a jihadi army marching against some Christian population. So it isn't wrong to say that the Europeans created the Islamist problem. That's not historical. You always argue from history all the time. So let's get your history correct. The Islamist problem would be there with or without UNRWA, with or without Balfour, with or without the UN and any other organization you want to blame. It's just that UNRWA has been hijacked by the Islamists, like so many other institutions. So it's just not right to say that. So it's not our responsibility to take in Islamists from Palestine. They should stay where they are, and we need to de-radicalize them inside Gaza. But furthermore, and this is my point that I really think is really important, it's a matter of justice that we empower and enable Palestinians to remain in their homeland. And Gaza is the homeland of the Palestinians, and they have a right to be there. And we need to create an environment in which they can live there. And the only way that that can be achieved is their Christianization.
So I think we're going around in circles. The only thing I just quickly add,
I think that probably means we've covered the points we want to cover.
The one thing I just quickly say is they don't see Gaza as their homeland. They see Israel as their homeland. Most of them believe they are refugees,
which is a lie.
Palestinian refugees who are living in what they would call Palestine, which is difficult to get your head around. Living in refugee camps which look like cities, but it's not for me to.
Well, if that's true, then the same world that tells Israel that the Gazans are refugees need to accept that all Cypriots from northern Cyprus are refugees and that they have the right to return to northern Cyprus. But they won't say that. And this is the duplicity of the left. I am not saying that Gazans are refugees, but what I am saying is that they were born in Gaza. They were raised in Gaza. That is their home. No one has the right to drive them out. No settler has the right to drive them out. Israel does not have the right to drive them out. And I'm not saying you do. I'm not saying you're advocating that. There are some settlers that would try to argue that. And what we need to do is create an environment in which they accept that that's their homeland and they make the best of it. And Christianity will help in that.
And what we'll do, because I like being a good sport, we'll give the Englishman the last word.
Well, here's my last word. Here's my last word. Like, you know, the reality is that the world faces a really complex problem that liberalism clearly can't solve. Liberalism can't solve. You know, we've got to square the circle in which, how do we end a protracted war that is being sustained and fed by ideologies of bitterness, revenge, and resentment? The thing is, there isn't the same narrative of forgiveness within Islam that you have within Christianity. You know, they have the concept within Islam of qisas, like for like punishment. You know, you kill someone, I kill someone, and it just goes on and on and on until the whole world's blind, an eye for an eye. You know, and what we've got to, you've got to snap that ideology. And Israel has always maintained, and I believe it to be true, that it can live in peace with its neighbors if they just stop trying to destroy it, as proven by Israel and Egypt, as proven by Israel and Jordan. The way to change the situation in Gaza is to change the ruling ideology, not to dilute it to some modernist version that just doesn't have the roots to survive, but to change it radically. And Christianity is the solution that creates a security environment acceptable to Israel, helps the Gazans to accept reality. You know, they're not refugees. That Gaza is their homeland. But then will give them the existential, moral, and philosophical ideology and equipment, metaphysical equipment, to make the best of their world. And that means living in peace with Israel and building a Singapore in the Mediterranean. Just like Lebanon was a beautiful country before the Islamists got their teeth into Lebanon, a Christian Gaza will be a beautiful country in which Palestinians will be able to make a success of it, because they'll be investing in an ideology that encourages them to build hospitals and schools rather than tunnels and rockets. So,
and on that note, Bob, where can people find you if they want to either argue against your crusade or join you on it? But which social media can they find you?
I only go for a Billy Graham peaceful style crusade, but yeah, they can find me on Bob's Speaker's Corner, which is my channel, if they want to come there and have a chat with me.
And if you're Jewish, make sure you balance it with a nice dose of Rabbi Tovia Singer.
who is still running from Dr. Michael Brown.
I think Michael Brown's running from his own problems at the moment.
Yeah. All right. It's lovely to talk to you, Joseph.
Thank you.
God bless.
Thank you for joining us. God bless.
No worries. Take care.